What happens when a power-tripping cop picks the wrong elderly black woman to humiliate in public, only to freeze moments later when he realizes her son is a four-star general. This is the story of how quiet dignity met blind authority, and how one simple mistake unraveled everything a man thought he controlled. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun settled gently over the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, casting a soft amber glow across a nearly empty roadside bus stop where time seemed to move just a little slower than the rest of the world. A wooden bench, worn smooth by decades of use, sat beneath a crooked metal sign that rattled faintly whenever a breeze passed through. On that bench sat Evelyn Carter, her posture upright, her movements unhurried, as though she had long ago learned the value of conserving energy not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. At 72, her presence carried a quiet orderliness. Her gray hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her blouse pressed with care, and her sensible shoes placed flat against the pavement as if grounded by something deeper than routine. In her lap rested a simple canvas bag, the kind that spoke more of practicality than appearance, its fabric softened by years of use. Around her, life drifted by in fragments. A delivery truck groaned past in the distance. Somewhere, a screen door slammed shut, followed by the faint echo of a dog barking behind a fence. Two teenagers crossed the street without looking her way, their laughter trailing behind them like a fleeting echo. Evelyn watched it all with calm, observant eyes, the kind that did not miss much, yet never lingered long enough to judge. There was no urgency in her demeanor, no sign that she felt out of place or unwelcome, even in a town that had not always made room for people like her. She reached in her bag and carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing its edges with deliberate fingers. It was a bus schedule, creased from being opened and closed too many times, but she studied it as though it still held importance. Her lips moved slightly, counting stops, confirming times, though it was clear this was not her first time here. A passing gust lifted the corner of the paper, and she pressed it down gently, her hand steady despite the years behind it. To anyone watching, she would have appeared exactly as she intended, an elderly woman waiting for a ride, minding her own business, asking nothing from the world except a moment of quiet. But there was something else beneath that stillness, something measured in the way her shoulders never slouched, in the way her gaze remained level even when no one was looking back. It was the kind of composure that was not taught late in life. It was earned, shaped, and reinforced through experiences that rarely announced themselves out loud. The distant hum of an approaching vehicle began to grow louder, tires rolling steadily against asphalt, though Evelyn did not turn her head right away. She simply folded the schedule back along its worn creases and returned it to her bag, her expression unchanged, as if whatever was coming had already been accounted for long before it arrived. The vehicle revealed itself as a patrol car the moment it rounded the bend, its black and white frame catching the morning light in sharp contrast against the quiet road. It did not pass by. Instead, it slowed, deliberately, almost theatrically, before easing to a stop just a few yards from the bus stop. The engine idled with a low, steady vibration that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the otherwise peaceful morning. Evelyn remained seated, her hands resting lightly on her bag, her gaze forward, though there was no mistaking that she had registered the presence behind her. The driver's side door opened with a firm, practiced motion, followed by the heavy thud of boots hitting pavement. Officer Daniel Briggs stepped out, adjusting his belt as he straightened to full height. He was broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, every detail in place, as if it were part of a performance he had perfected over years. His jaw tightened slightly as his eyes landed on Evelyn, scanning her from head to toe in a slow, assessing sweep that lingered just a moment too long on the worn canvas bag in her lap. He did not greet her. He did not ask if she needed assistance. Instead, he began walking toward her with a kind of confidence that did not seek permission. Each step was measured, deliberate, his boots striking the pavement with a rhythm that carried authority more than purpose. As he approached, Evelyn finally turned her head, her expression composed, her eyes steady, meeting his gaze without challenge but without submission either. That alone seemed to irritate him. "Morning," Briggs said, though the word carried no warmth, only a thin layer of formality stretched over suspicion. Evelyn inclined her head slightly. "Good morning, officer." Her voice was soft, even unhurried. It landed between them without tension, but Briggs did not receive it that way. His eyes narrowed, as if her calmness disrupted something he expected. He shifted his stance closer, invading the small space around the bench without asking. "You waiting for something?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, though the question sounded less like curiosity and more like a test. Evelyn glanced briefly at the sign above them before returning her gaze to him. "The bus," she answered simply. Briggs let out a quiet breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, but close enough to carry dismissal. His attention dropped again to the bag. "Mind telling me what you've got in there?" he asked, his tone sharpening just enough to draw a line between suggestion and demand. Evelyn's fingers rested calmly against the fabric of the bag. She did not clutch it tighter. She did not move it away. "Just my belongings," she replied. The simplicity of her answer seemed to press against him in a way that made his posture stiffen. He glanced briefly over his shoulder, as if checking for an audience, then stepped even closer, his shadow falling across her lap. "I'm going to need you to be a little more specific than that," he said, his voice lowering, tightening. A car passed on a road behind them, its driver slowing just slightly, sensing the shift in tone. Evelyn remained seated, her back straight, her eyes steady. "There's nothing in here that concerns you, officer," she said, not defiant, not raised, just certain. That certainty landed harder than resistance ever could. Briggs's jaw flexed, a muscle ticking visibly near his cheek as his hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing against the equipment there in a habitual, almost unconscious gesture. "We'll see about that," he muttered, the words carrying the first clear edge of escalation as the quiet morning began to fracture around them. "We will see about that," Briggs repeated, but this time there was no muttering, no restraint, only a sharpened edge that cut clean through the quiet air as his hand moved without hesitation. He reached down and grabbed the strap of Evelyn's canvas bag, his grip firm, fingers curling into the worn fabric as though he had already decided what he would find inside. The motion was abrupt, unnecessary, and entirely deliberate. The bag shifted in Evelyn's lap, but she did not tighten her hold. She simply looked up at him, her gaze steady, her expression unchanged, as if she had already measured this moment long before it arrived. "Officer," she said, her voice calm but carrying a quiet weight, "there is no need for that." Briggs did not release the bag. Instead, he gave a slight tug, testing her response, his lips pressing into a thin line when she did not react the way he expected. "When I ask a question," he said, leaning in just enough for his shadow to fully cover her, "I expect a straight answer. And when I give an instruction, I expect compliance." His voice carried across the small stretch of pavement, drawing the attention of a man fueling his truck across the street. The man paused, nozzle in hand, watching without stepping closer. Evelyn's fingers slid gently off the bag as she allowed it to remain in Briggs's grip, not out of surrender, but out of control. "You already have your answer," she replied, her tone even, each word placed carefully, "and I have given you no reason to suspect otherwise." That only seemed to tighten something inside him. Briggs exhaled sharply through his nose, his shoulders squaring as though he were bracing for a confrontation that had not been offered. "That is not for you to decide," he snapped, the authority in his voice rising, louder now, meant to be heard. Another car slowed as it passed, the driver's head turning briefly before continuing on. The stillness that had once defined the bus stop had begun to unravel, replaced by something tense, something watchful. Briggs shifted his stance, planting his boots more firmly, and with his free hand he gestured toward the bench. "Stand up," he ordered, the words clipped final. Evelyn did not move immediately, not out of defiance, not out of hesitation, but because she chose the timing of her own actions. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hands on the edge of the bench and rose to her feet, her movements measured, controlled, every motion steady despite the imbalance of power in front of her. She stood facing him, not shrinking, not stepping back, simply present. The difference in their posture was striking, his rigid, pressing forward, hers composed, anchored in place. "Turn around," Briggs added, his tone dropping lower, colder now, as his hand tightened slightly on the bag strap. Evelyn tilted her head, just a fraction. Not enough to challenge, but enough to acknowledge the instruction without submitting to its tone. "Is there a reason you are treating me this way?" she asked, her voice still calm, but carrying something deeper now, something that did not ask for permission. The question hung between them, unanswered, unwelcome. Briggs's jaw clenched again, the muscle in his cheek jumping as his patience thinned into something harsher. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, stepping closer, his presence pressing into her space as if proximity alone could force obedience. "You fit the description of someone we are looking for. Now, turn around." The explanation was vague, hollow, but delivered with confidence, as though the truth of it did not matter as long as it sounded official. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment longer, her eyes unreadable, then slowly turned as instructed, her back straight, her hands resting calmly at her sides. The morning light caught the silver strands in her hair as she faced away from him, the scene unfolding exactly as he intended, except for one detail he could not recognize yet. She was not afraid, and that absence of fear, quiet and unwavering, unsettled him far more than resistance ever could. She was not afraid, and that, more than anything, seemed to provoke him. Briggs stepped in closer, the space between them collapsing until his presence felt imposed rather than official. "Hands where I can see them," he said, though her arms had not moved from her sides. Without waiting for any response, he shifted the canvas bag off her shoulder completely, letting it hang from his grip for a brief second before dropping it onto the bench with a careless motion. The soft thud echoed louder than it should have in the tense quiet. Evelyn remained still, her back straight, her chin level, as if the act had not unsettled her at all. Briggs turned, slightly, positioning himself beside her, his hand hovering near her upper arm before finally making contact. His grip was firm, unnecessary in its force, fingers pressing into the fabric of her sleeve as though he expected resistance. "Do not move," he instructed, guiding her a half step forward, away from the bench. The command came sharp, edged with impatience. Evelyn complied without protest, taking the step he demanded, her shoes scraping lightly against the pavement. There was no stumble, no hesitation, only controlled movement that seemed to deny him the struggle he was almost hoping for. Behind them, the man at the gas pump had stopped pretending not to watch. Another figure had emerged from a nearby storefront, arms folded, gaze fixed on the unfolding scene. Briggs noticed the attention, and something in his posture shifted, not restraint, but performance. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and reached for the bag again. This time, there was no hesitation. He yanked it open with a rough pull, the zipper sliding back with a harsh sound that cut through the air. Without care, without permission, he tipped it forward. The contents spilled out in a scattered display across the bench and onto the ground below. A neatly folded handkerchief, a worn Bible with softened edges, a small container of medication, a pair of reading glasses in a scratch case. All of it exposed in a careless sweep, items that spoke of a quiet, ordinary life now laid bare for strangers to see. A prescription bottle rolled off the edge of the bench, tapping once against the pavement before settling near Evelyn's feet. She did not bend to pick it up. Her hands remained at her sides, her posture unchanged, though her eyes followed the movement with a quiet awareness that said she noticed everything. Briggs leaned over the scattered items, his movements abrupt, flipping through them with the back of his hand, nudging objects aside as though searching for something that would justify the scene he had created. "What is all this?" he muttered, though the answer was obvious. There was no contraband, No hidden compartment, nothing that aligned with the suspicion he had decided to enforce. And yet, instead of pulling back, he pressed further. "You think this is funny," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Standing out here acting like you have nothing to hide?" Evelyn turned her head slightly, just enough for her voice to reach him without raising it. "I told you already," she said, each word steady grounded. "There is nothing there that concerns you." Her calm did not defuse him. It sharpened him. Briggs straightened abruptly, his expression tightening as his gaze flicked between her and the small gathering of onlookers. Control was slipping, not in action, but in narrative, and he would not allow that. "Turn your hands behind your back," he ordered, the words coming faster now, heavier, as his hand moved once more toward her arm. "If you're going to stand here and refuse to cooperate, then we're going to do this the hard way." Evelyn did not immediately move, not out of defiance, but because she was measuring something deeper than his voice, something he could not see and could not understand. The morning that had begun in stillness had now fully shifted, the air carrying tension like a held breath, waiting for the moment it would finally break. The air held that fragile, suspended tension, and Briggs decided to shatter it. "I'm not asking again," he said, his voice rising with a hard, clipped edge that carried across the small crowd now forming at a cautious distance. His hand closed firmly around Evelyn's wrist, pulling it back with a force that was far beyond what the situation required. The movement was abrupt, jarring, meant to assert control rather than ensure compliance. Evelyn's body shifted slightly with the pull, but her balance held, her posture recovering instantly, her expression unchanged. "There is no need for this," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the pressure on her arm. That only fueled him further. Briggs stepped behind her, taking her other wrist without waiting, guiding both hands toward the small of her back. His grip tightened, fingers pressing in with a rigidity that bordered on aggression. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play games," he snapped, the accusation hollow, but delivered with conviction. The metallic glint of the handcuffs caught the morning light as he pulled them free, the sound of the chain shifting in his hand sharp and deliberate. Around them, the onlookers shifted uneasily. A woman near the storefront raised her phone, hesitating before beginning to record. The man by the gas pump took a step closer, then stopped again, caught between instinct and caution. Evelyn stood still as Briggs positioned her wrists, her breathing even, her shoulders relaxed in a way that seemed to defy the moment. "You are making a mistake," she said, not louder, not sharper, just certain. The words did not plead. They did not warn in the way Briggs expected. They simply existed, calm and unshaken. He ignored them. "You are being detained for obstruction," he declared, though the charge had no foundation, his voice now fully projecting, performing authority for anyone watching. He began to bring the cuffs toward her wrists, the motion practiced, almost routine. But there was nothing routine about the way Evelyn stood. No flinch, no attempt to pull away, just stillness. It unsettled him in a way he could not name. "Last chance," he added, leaning closer, his voice dropping into something colder, something meant to intimidate at close range. "You want to tell me what you are really doing out here?" Evelyn turned her head just slightly, enough for her profile to catch the light, enough for her words to reach him without effort. "Waiting," she replied. The simplicity of it struck like a quiet contradiction to everything he was trying to force into place. Briggs exhaled sharply, frustration tightening his movements as he snapped one cuff around her wrist with more force than necessary. The sound rang out, final, decisive. The second cuff hovered just inches from closing when something in the distance shifted. Not loud at first, not obvious, just a faint, growing rumble that did not belong to the slow rhythm of the morning. Briggs did not notice it yet. He was too focused on completing the act, too committed to the version of control he believed he still held. But Evelyn heard it. Her eyes moved just slightly, not toward him, not toward the crowd, but toward the road beyond. And for the first time since he had approached her, there was the smallest change in her expression. Not fear, not concern, Something else entirely. Something that suggested the moment he thought he owned was already slipping beyond his reach. The faint rumble in the distance grew steadier, but Briggs remained locked in his own momentum, the second cuff still poised in his hand as though nothing outside this moment could possibly matter. His grip on Evelyn's wrist tightened again, more out of irritation now than procedure, his patience thinning into something brittle. "You had your chance," he said, his voice carrying that finality he had been building toward, as if this entire encounter had been leading to this exact point. Could have been simple, could have been quick, but you chose to make it difficult. He shifted his stance, positioning her slightly toward the patrol car, already envisioning the next steps, paperwork, processing, a version of events that would justify everything he had done. His free hand hovered near his radio, then dropped again, deciding he did not need backup for something he believed he had fully under control. Around them, the small crowd had grown quieter, the earlier murmurs replaced by a tense stillness. A phone was now clearly raised, recording, though no one spoke. The world seemed to be watching, holding its breath. Evelyn remained composed, her wrist still secured in one cuff, the other hand resting calmly despite the pressure. She did not pull away. She did not argue. Instead, she spoke. "Officer," she said, her voice low, measured, yet carrying with it a weight that did not belong to fear. "You still have time to stop." The words were not loud, but they cut through the air with a clarity that made Briggs pause. Not in action, but in thought, just for a fraction of a second. He glanced at her profile, searching for something, panic, desperation, anything that would confirm his control. He found none. Evelyn continued, her tone unchanged, each word deliberate. "There are moments in a man's life where he can choose the kind of person he walks away as," she said. "This is one of them." The statement lingered, not as a threat, not as a plea, but as something far more unsettling, certainty without explanation. Briggs let out a breath that edged into a dry, dismissive chuckle, the sound short, sharp, and stripped of humor. "You think you are in a position to give me advice?" he replied, shaking his head slightly, as if amused by the idea. "I have heard all before. Everyone has a story. Everyone thinks they are special." He adjusted his grip again, bringing the second cuff closer, the metal catching the light as his fingers positioned it with practiced ease. "You are not the first person to stand here and tell me I am making a mistake," he added, his voice lowering, turning colder. "And you will not be the last." Evelyn's gaze shifted forward toward the road, toward the source of that growing sound that now carried a subtle vibration through the pavement beneath their feet. "No," she said quietly, almost to herself, though he could hear it. "I imagine I will be the last." That should have meant something. It should have landed. But Briggs only smirked, the expression settling into place with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "That is where you are wrong," he replied, and without another second of hesitation, he snapped the second cuff shut around her wrist. The sound rang out, crisp and final, sealing the choice he had just made. Whatever chance he had been offered, whatever unseen line he might have stepped back from, was gone, and he did not even realize it. The sharp click of the second cuff had barely faded when the distant rumble finally broke into something undeniable. It was no longer background noise. It was presence, low, controlled, and deliberate. Briggs's hand lingered near Evelyn's wrists for a second longer than necessary, as if something, some instinct he could not name, had reached up and pressed against his certainty. Then the first vehicle came into view. Matte black, long, unmarked. It did not slow as it approached, it aligned. Then another followed, and another. A convoy, precision in motion. The sound of engines rolled across the quiet roadside, not loud, not chaotic, but coordinated in a way that made the air feel structured, controlled by something far beyond a single patrol officer's reach. Briggs turned his head, his brows knitting together, confusion flickering across his face as the first vehicle pulled to a clean, exact stop just feet away from the bus stop. Doors opened in near-perfect sequence. Not hurried, not aggressive, intentional. Men stepped out, uniformed, composed, their movements synchronized with a discipline that spoke before any word was said. The crowd that had gathered instinctively shifted back, space opening without instruction. Briggs straightened unconsciously, his posture adjusting, his shoulders pulling back as if trying to reassert something that was already slipping. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath, though no one answered him. Then the final door opened, and everything changed. The man who stepped out did not rush. He did not scan the scene in panic. He walked forward with a controlled, measured stride, his presence alone altering the balance of the space. His uniform carried weight, not just in fabric, but in meaning. 4 stars rested on his shoulders, catching the morning light in a way that demanded recognition, not requested it. General Marcus Carter. His eyes did not wander. They fixed immediately on one thing: his mother standing in handcuffs. There was no visible outburst, no raised voice, but something in his expression hardened with a precision that was far more dangerous than anger. He stopped just short of Briggs, his gaze dropping briefly to the cuffs, then rising again with a stillness that carried authority in its purest form. "Remove them," he said. Not loud, not aggressive. Final. The words landed with a weight that seemed to press the air itself downward. Briggs froze, not metaphorically, completely. His hand, still near Evelyn's wrist, hovered as if it had forgotten how to move. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes flicked from the stars on Marcus's shoulders to his face, then back again, as if his mind was struggling to align what he was seeing with what he had just done. The sound broke from him, thin, uncertain, stripped of everything that had defined his voice just moments ago. He swallowed, his throat tightening visibly. Around him, the uniformed personnel had formed a silent perimeter, their presence undeniable, their attention focused. There was no chaos, no confusión, only structure, only control, and none of it belonged to him anymore. Evelyn turned her head slightly, just enough to look at her son, her expression softening by the smallest margin. "I told him he still had time," she said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "You gave him more than he deserved." Briggs's fingers trembled as they finally moved, fumbling against the cuff mechanism, the metal resisting his unsteady touch for a fraction of a second that felt far too long. The sound of the lock releasing echoed, louder than it should have, each click unraveling the illusion of control he had built. His breathing had changed, shorter now, uneven. His earlier certainty was gone, replaced by something raw, something exposed. Fear, not the kind that came from danger, the kind that came from realization. He had not just made a mistake. He had stepped directly into something far beyond his authority. And now, there was no way out. The final click of the cuffs releasing echoed into a silence that felt heavier than any noise that had come before it. Briggs's hands dropped away from Evelyn's wrists as if they no longer belonged to him, his fingers stiff, uncertain, hovering in the space where authority had just been stripped bare. He took a half step back without realizing it, his boots scraping faintly against the pavement, his posture no longer rigid but unsettled, fractured. General Marcus Carter did not move immediately. He simply stood there, his presence anchoring the entire scene, his eyes fixed on Briggs with a focus that did not waver. "Step away from her," he said, his tone unchanged, calm but absolute. Briggs obeyed instantly. There was no hesitation this time, no attempt to reclaim ground. He stepped back fully, the distance between them widening, though it did nothing to ease the pressure that now pressed down on him from every direction. Behind Marcus, one of the uniformed officers stepped forward, his movements precise as he addressed Briggs directly. "Officer Daniel Briggs," he said, his voice formal, measured, "you are being relieved of duty effective immediately pending investigation into misconduct and abuse of authority." The words landed clean, each one deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. Briggs blinked, his mind struggling to keep pace, his earlier confidence dissolving into disbelief. I was following procedure," he stammered, the explanation weak even as he said it, his voice lacking the force it once carried. No one responded. Another officer approached, this one from the local department, his expression tight, his jaw set in a way that suggested he already knew what this moment meant. He reached for Briggs's shoulder, not aggressively, but firmly enough to make it clear this was no longer a discussion. "Turn around," he instructed. The same words Briggs had used earlier now came back to him, stripped of arrogance, stripped of control. For a brief second, Briggs hesitated, not out of defiance, but out of shock. Then slowly, mechanically, he complied. His hands moved behind his back, not resisting, not questioning, just following orders. The cold weight of restraint settled onto his wrists, the sound of a mechanism closing carrying a bitter symmetry. Around them, the small crowd watched in stunned silence. The shift in power, so complete it felt unreal. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone slightly, her eyes wide. The man by the gas pump exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. Evelyn stood quietly beside Marcus, her hands now free, her posture unchanged, as if the entire ordeal had passed through her without shaking the foundation beneath her. Marcus turned slightly toward her, his voice softening just enough to belong to her alone. "Are you all right?" he asked. Evelyn gave a small nod, her expression calm, grounded. "I am," she replied simply. There was no need for more. Behind them, Briggs was being escorted toward his own patrol car, each step heavier than the last, the weight of what had just happened settling into him with increasing clarity. His badge, once a symbol he wielded without question, was unclipped, removed in front of everyone, the small metallic sound of it leaving his uniform louder than any accusation. He did not look up again. He could not, because everything he had believed himself to be in control of had just been taken from him, not with force, but with truth. And there was no defense against that. The patrol car door closed with a dull, final sound as Briggs was guided inside, the echo of it settling into the quiet like the last note of something that had already ended. No one rushed to fill the silence that followed. The tension that had once stretched tight across the roadside slowly began to loosen, unraveling piece by piece as the weight of authority shifted back to where it belonged. The convoy remained in place, engines idling low, steady, controlled, no longer a force of disruption, but one of presence and assurance. Evelyn Carter stood beside her son, her hands free once more, her posture unchanged from the moment this began. If anything, she seemed even more grounded now, as though the world had simply corrected itself around her. General Marcus Carter glanced toward the scattered belongings still resting on the bench and pavement, the quiet remnants of a moment that had tried and failed to diminish her. Without a word, one of the uniformed personnel stepped forward and began to gather the items with careful precision, handling each piece with a level of respect that contrasted sharply with how they had been treated just minutes before. The worn Bible was placed gently back into the canvas bag. The glasses case was wiped clean of dust before being set inside. Even the small prescription bottle was retrieved and secured without haste. Evelyn watched, her expression soft but steady, acknowledging the gesture with a slight nod that needed no words. Around them, the small crowd began to shift again, but this time it was different. There was no tension, no hesitation, only a quiet recognition of what had just unfolded. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone completely, her face reflecting something deeper than curiosity now. The man by the gas pump gave a subtle shake of his head, not in disbelief, but in understanding. Justice had not arrived loudly. It had simply stood its ground and revealed itself. Marcus turned back to his mother, his voice low, respectful, carrying a warmth that had not been present moments before. "Your ride is here," he said, though the words carried more meaning than transportation alone. Evelyn allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile, not wide, not triumphant, just enough to reflect a quiet satisfaction that did not need validation. "I suppose it is," she replied. He offered his arm, not out of necessity, but out of respect, and she accepted it with the same calm grace she had carried from the beginning. Together, they began to walk toward the waiting vehicle, their pace unhurried, their presence steady. No one stopped them. No one questioned them. The space opened naturally, as if the world itself understood its place in that moment. As Evelyn stepped into the vehicle, She paused briefly, her gaze drifting once more across the bus stop, the bench, the now empty stretch of pavement where everything had shifted. There was no bitterness in her expression, no anger, only a quiet closure. She had not needed to raise her voice. She had not needed to fight. The truth had done all the work for her. The door closed softly behind her, and, as the convoy began to move, the morning returned to its rhythm. The breeze stirred again. The distant sounds of everyday life resumed. And the bus stop, once the center of conflict, settled back into stillness, carrying with it the quiet reminder that dignity, when it stands firm, does not need to shout to be heard. What stands out in this story is not just the abuse of authority, but how fragile that authority truly was when it faced something real. Officer Briggs believed power came from control, from the ability to dominate a moment and force others to comply. But what he never understood is that true. Authority does not need to announce itself. It does not need to raise its voice, and it certainly does not rely on intimidation to exist. Evelyn Carter did not resist him with force. She did not argue or escalate, yet she held something far stronger than anything he carried on his belt. She carried certainty, discipline, and a lifetime of knowing exactly who she was. And when that quiet strength was finally revealed through her son, the entire illusion Briggs had built collapsed instantly. It is a reminder that arrogance often blinds people to the reality standing right in front of them. When someone mistakes silence for weakness, they are not assessing the other person. They're exposing their own limitations. And in moments like this, justice does not arrive as chaos. It arrives as clarity. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.